She walked into the bank to sign a $2 billion deal, but walked out in silence after a teller threw her ID on the floor. What the bank didn't know. She was one of the most powerful CEOs in America. And by the time they realized who she was, it was already too late. This one moment of disrespect destroyed everything. The air inside the bank was calm, until it wasn't. It was late morning on a Wednesday. People stood in line, scrolling through their phones, sipping coffee, or quietly chatting as the soft background music played overhead. But the stillness of routine was about to be shattered. A woman approached the teller window. Not just any woman, Danielle Monroe. Confident, elegant, and focused. She walked with the kind of authority that turned heads without her even trying. Her navy blue suit fit like it had been tailored for power, and her heels clicked against the marble floor with precision. This was a woman who knew who she was, and made no apologies for it. She placed a manila folder on the counter, reached into her purse, and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. With calm assurance, she slid her government-issued ID across to the teller and said, "I'm here to process a wire transfer. Corporate account, Nova Bridge Tech. My team called ahead." The teller, a young man in his late 20s, barely looked up. He didn't ask for the transaction details. He didn't smile. He just stared at her. A slow, suspicious glance from her face to her ID, then back to her face again. And then, the words that silenced the room. "You people always try to pull this." Time seemed to freeze. A man 3 people back in line stopped mid-step. A mother with a toddler instinctively pulled her child closer. A bank manager near the door shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke, but everyone felt the weight of what had just been said. Danielle's eyes locked onto the teller's, her posture remaining upright, composed, professional. "Excuse me?" But the teller wasn't done. He picked up her ID with 2 fingers like it was something filthy, then let it fall, tossed it, really, onto the cold marble floor. "Yeah. Looks fake anyway." The ID skidded against the tiles before resting at her feet. Danielle didn't blink. No outburst. No raised voice. Just silence, thick with dignity and fire. She bent down slowly, picked it up, and dusted it off with the sleeve of her blazer. Every move was deliberate, graceful, even regal. She stood tall again, eyeing the man who just tried to belittle her in front of everyone. By now, the entire lobby had stopped. A few phones were out, discreetly recording. Some people looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with growing curiosity, perhaps realizing they were witnessing something that would be talked about long after today. The teller stood with folded arms, not the least bit apologetic. He smirked, as if daring her to say something. That's when Danielle spoke again. Calm, controlled, and deadly clear. "What's your name?" The teller scoffed. "Doesn't matter." From the side of the room, the branch manager, a man in his 50s with a graying beard and nervous hands, hurried over. "Ma'am." "Miss Danielle, we're terribly sorry. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. If we could just—" Danielle didn't even turn to look at him. Her eyes were still fixed on the teller, as if memorizing the moment. Then, quietly, she said, "Don't worry. There won't be a second chance to fix this." She closed her folder, slipped her ID back into her wallet, turned, and walked toward the exit with the same unshaken confidence she had walked in with. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was louder than any confrontation. As the door slowly closed behind her, the tension in the room seemed to exhale. The manager ran a hand down his face. The teller rolled his eyes, still unaware of the storm he had just invited. No one in that bank realized that the woman they had just dismissed was Danielle Monroe, CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the U.S. The company behind cutting-edge Fintech software. The firm that had already partnered with over 40 banks and was set to launch a $2 billion partnership deal with one more, this bank. And she was there that morning to finalize it. But that deal would never happen now. All it took was one moment of ignorance, of disrespect, of prejudice. A decision made in seconds that would cost them everything. And Danielle? She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Because when you know your worth, you don't argue for recognition. You walk away. And let the silence speak for you. For a few seconds, the entire world inside that bank stood still. The soft chatter in the background vanished. The tapping of keyboards ceased. Even the overhead announcements seemed to mute themselves. An invisible tension gripped the air. Danielle Monroe, CEO, innovator, and self-made billionaire, stood tall, staring at the marble floor where her government-issued ID had just been tossed like garbage. Some bank staff gasped quietly, hands instinctively moving to their mouths. Others looked away, pretending not to have seen. One young teller whispered, "Oh my God!" but didn't move. A security guard near the door shifted uncomfortably, unsure of whether to step in or stay back. Danielle, meanwhile, didn't flinch. Not a tear. Not a frown. Not even a raised eyebrow. She stooped gracefully, picked up her ID with steady hands, brushed off an invisible speck of dust, and returned it to her designer wallet. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, straightened her spine. There was no rage, just regal silence. The kind that came from knowing exactly who you are, and how small the person in front of you really is. Then, slowly, her gaze lifted. And when her eyes locked onto the teller's face, the air grew colder. The teller, still standing with crossed arms and smug defiance, gave a sarcastic laugh. "Doesn't matter," he said, as if daring her to do something about it. But Danielle didn't react. She didn't need to. Just then, the branch manager burst onto the scene, clearly sensing the weight of what had just occurred. His dress shirt was slightly wrinkled, and sweat glistened on his forehead as he forced a smile. "Ma'am, miss." "There must have been some kind of misunderstanding," he stammered, nervously glancing between Danielle and the teller. "I assure you, this isn't how we normally treat our, valued guests." Danielle didn't even turn to look at him. She kept her eyes on the teller, letting the silence do what words never could. Then, finally, she spoke, quietly, but with such piercing finality that the entire lobby heard it. "Don't worry. There won't be a second chance to fix this." The manager's face went pale. The teller shifted slightly now, the smirk fading just enough to reveal the flicker of unease behind his bravado. And just like that, Danielle turned around. She didn't yell. She didn't plead for justice. She didn't demand a supervisor or file a complaint. She simply gathered her folder, checked her phone, and walked out with poise, her heels clicking against the floor with the same confidence she walked in with. But this time, the weight of her silence followed her out the door. Behind her, people began to whisper. "Wait, wasn't that Danielle Monroe? Is she the one from Novabridge? Oh no, did we just mess up something big?" But no one moved fast enough. Danielle exited the bank like a storm that never needed to raise its voice. She slid into the back of a waiting black Tesla, her assistant holding the door, and within moments, the car was gone. But the damage? That had only just begun. The branch manager spent the rest of the day calling corporate, trying to figure out what had just happened. He reviewed security footage, asked staff for details, and finally came across the full story. And that's when the panic set in. Danielle Monroe hadn't just been a customer. She had been at the bank that day to finalize a multi-billion-dollar partnership, an exclusive deal between Novabridge Tech and the bank's corporate leadership. The initiative would have launched the bank into the national spotlight, with access to cutting-edge fintech software, consumer security AI, and increased shareholder trust. This was no casual transaction. It was the culmination of 2 years of negotiation. All that was left was her signature. And it would have happened that day, right there in that very building. But now, it was gone. No phone call. No email. No explanation. Just silence. Danielle didn't go public. She didn't tweet about it. She didn't grant any interviews or stir any outrage. She just vanished, taking $2 billion in opportunity with her. Behind closed doors, word began to spread through the finance and tech industries. Top CEOs whispered about it at conferences. Partners quietly withdrew proposals. One disrespectful act by a single teller had not only ruined a deal, it had tarnished the bank's name in elite business circles, all without a single headline. Because Danielle Monroe understood something most people don't, power doesn't always need to raise its voice. Sometimes, it just walks away, and lets the silence echo louder than any scream. And for that bank, the echo would last for years. Danielle Monroe wasn't just stopping by the bank to check a balance or deposit a check. No, this visit had been months in the making. It was the final step in one of the most ambitious tech bank collaborations in recent history. Behind the scenes, her company, Novabridge Tech, had been quietly working on a next-generation fintech software suite designed specifically for mid-sized regional banks. While big national banks had the budget to build custom solutions for fraud detection, AI-based credit risk analysis, and biometric login security, smaller banks had been left behind. Danielle wanted to change that. Her software didn't just patch holes. It promised to completely transform how regional banks protected customer data, streamlined online transactions, and modernized digital experiences. From facial recognition logins to AI-powered security alerts, it was a game-changer. The partnership was structured to be mutually explosive in growth. NovaBridge would provide the infrastructure and custom-tailored tech, while the bank, the very one Danielle walked into that morning, would serve as the pilot partner. The plan was to launch in a select group of branches, gather data, refine the system, and then roll it out across dozens of banks nationwide. Once the deal was signed, it would unlock over $2 billion in projected revenue and market value within 5 years, for both sides. It was the kind of partnership that would have earned media coverage, investor confidence, and an edge over competitors. All that remained? Danielle's final signature. She didn't need to be there in person. Her lawyers could have handled it. But for her, business wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. She wanted to shake hands, look people in the eye, and ensure the bank's leadership lived the same values she built her company on. But what she got was a very different kind of experience. When Danielle walked into the bank lobby that morning, she carried more than just her identification and paperwork. She carried years of trust, vision, and opportunity. But all it took was one employee, one instant, to destroy all of it. The teller's comment, the tossed ID, the disrespectful stare. It wasn't just about Danielle Monroe as a person. It was about what the bank allowed to represent them at their front desk. And Danielle had a rule, a non-negotiable, personal code she lived by. If your frontline staff doesn't respect people, you don't deserve to grow with mine. Because in her eyes, if a bank couldn't treat every customer with dignity, how could they be trusted to handle the innovation she was about to deliver? That moment in the bank wasn't just a minor incident, it was a litmus test. And the bank had failed. Later that same day, Danielle returned to her office. She didn't call the bank. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't ask for an apology. She simply sent an internal message to her legal team. Withdraw. Terminate all active negotiations. Do not disclose reason. We're moving on. That was it. The next morning, the bank's executive team was confused. They hadn't heard from her. No final confirmation. No signed documents. Just nothing. They tried to reach out. Her assistant said she was unavailable. Her legal team responded with a short sentence. Our client has chosen to discontinue this partnership. No lawsuit. No demand. Just silence. And that silence was louder than any headline could have been. At first, the bank's leadership thought maybe it was a delay. Maybe she got cold feet. Maybe another investor swooped in. They had no idea what had happened in their own lobby. Until whispers began to spread. One junior VP who had seen the footage mentioned something. Another manager heard Danielle had walked out early. A board member raised concerns. Eventually, it reached the CEO of the bank. And when the truth surfaced, the reality hit them like a train. They had lost the $2 billion deal because of how they treated someone who looked too different to belong. Danielle Monroe didn't go to the media. She didn't post the footage. She didn't use her influence to publicly shame the bank. Because true power doesn't need to shout. She knew that her silence would cost them more than any press conference ever could. Investors started backing away. Other partners began quietly reevaluating deals. Internal morale dropped. The teller who caused the incident terminated. But the damage was already done. To fully understand the weight of what happened in that bank lobby, you first have to understand who Danielle Monroe really is. Because what that teller saw was only a fragment of her identity. And what he failed to see was everything that mattered. Danielle Monroe was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, the youngest of 3 kids in a hardworking, middle-class family. Her father was a mechanic who worked 6 days a week to keep food on the table, and her mother was a school librarian who always reminded her children that books can take you anywhere. Danielle took that message to heart. She was brilliant from a young age, but her brilliance wasn't always recognized in the traditional ways. In school, she wasn't the loudest or the most popular. But while other kids were on TikTok or hanging out after class, Danielle spent her afternoons in the local public library, teaching herself how to code. At just 14 years old, she built her first app, a budgeting tool for teens that gained traction in online forums. By the time she was 17, she had already started tutoring college students in Python and JavaScript. And at 19, while attending Georgia State University on a full academic scholarship, she launched her first tech startup from a cramped dorm room and a refurbished laptop. That first startup failed. But Danielle didn't. She studied the loss, absorbed the lessons, and pivoted. She started again, this time with a bigger vision, to close the gap between small financial institutions and the fast-moving world of digital banking. She believed that every community, no matter how small, deserved secure, intelligent, and user-friendly financial tools. That vision led to the founding of NovaBridge Tech, the company that would change her life. NovaBridge Tech wasn't just a fintech startup, it was a revolution wrapped in code. The company quickly gained recognition for its cutting-edge cybersecurity frameworks, tailored AI fraud detection systems, and real-time customer behavior tracking for smaller banks and credit unions that couldn't afford the systems used by big institutions. Under Danielle's leadership, NovaBridge grew rapidly, securing contracts with over 40 financial institutions across the U.S. Her solutions helped over 10 million users bank safer, faster, and smarter. She didn't just sit in boardrooms. She walked factory floors, sat with coders until 2 a.m., and flew cross-country for in-person client meetings because she believed in building real trust, not just sending invoices. Her story became the stuff of tech legend. Forbes profiled her as one of the top 50 female entrepreneurs under 40. TechCrunch hailed her as a quiet storm in cybersecurity. Business Insider ran a full-feature titled, "The Woman Who's Quietly Reshaping Banking for the Underserved." But despite all of that, the morning she walked into that bank, none of it mattered to the person behind the counter. She wasn't seen as a self-made tech innovator. She wasn't seen as a Forbes-listed CEO. She wasn't seen as the woman whose company had protected millions from fraud. No. In that moment, Danielle Monroe was reduced to a stereotype. Someone suspicious. Someone who didn't look like she belonged in a financial institution holding million-dollar documents. Someone who, to the teller, was pretending, because how could someone like her be real? It didn't matter that she was carrying the final paperwork for a multi-billion-dollar fintech deal. It didn't matter that she'd spent a decade building a company from scratch in an industry where less than 2% of venture capital goes to black women. It didn't matter that she had personally been endorsed by major CEOs, had software used in 30 states, and had transformed how financial institutions approach cybersecurity. To him, in that moment, she was just another face to dismiss. What the teller, and the bank, failed to realize was that Danielle Monroe wasn't just another customer. She was the embodiment of resilience, the product of generations of struggle and ambition. She was proof that brilliance doesn't always come dressed the way you expect, and that power sometimes walks in quietly, wearing heels and carrying history on its shoulders. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her work spoke volumes. Her values were unshakable. And her dignity couldn't be taken, not by ignorance, and certainly not by a moment of prejudice. That bank saw a stereotype. The world saw Danielle Monroe, a visionary, a builder, a force. And though they tried to reduce her, all they did was remind her why she built her own table instead of asking for a seat at theirs. At first, no one at the bank realized what had been lost. In the days that followed Danielle Monroe's quiet exit from the branch, business carried on as usual. The emails kept coming in. The phones kept ringing. Managers discussed their monthly KPIs and reviewed customer satisfaction scores. No alarms were triggered. No red flags were raised. But something was off. The legal team noticed that Danielle's attorneys had stopped responding to final paperwork. A high-level follow-up call with NovaBridge was rescheduled, then canceled, then ignored. A conference meeting that was once full of anticipation now sat empty on the calendar, with no explanation. At first, the executives brushed it off. She's probably just reviewing things. Maybe they need more time. She's busy, she's always traveling. But the silence dragged on. And on. Then, something unexpected happened. A partner bank quietly backed out of a small trial project. No reason given. Another one postponed a scheduled onboarding session for NovaBridge software. A senior investor requested a risk reassessment of the pending deal. That's when panic set in. Whispers began trickling through the hallways. Executives began asking one another quietly, "Did something happen when she visited our branch? Was she treated properly? Did someone screw up?" Nobody had a clear answer. After all, there had been no complaint, no viral post, no media coverage, just silence. And that silence was now a source of corporate dread. Eventually, someone close to the Atlanta branch shared a casual remark in a management Zoom call. "Well, there was that little incident with the teller and a black woman, but no way that was her, right?" Silence. The regional director leaned forward. "What incident?" That's when the truth began to emerge piece by piece. The security footage was reviewed. Internal emails were pulled. Staff were interviewed. And what they discovered was devastating. A teller had dismissed Danielle Monroe, had thrown her ID, had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful tech CEOs in America, in their own bank lobby. Worse yet, no one had stepped in fast enough to stop it. The manager at the branch had fumbled the apology. HR had never been alerted. No one followed up. And now Danielle was gone. By the time senior leadership reached out to make things right, they received only a short reply from her executive assistant. "Ms. Monroe has moved on." The fallout didn't happen in the form of lawsuits or social media outrage. Danielle didn't go public. She didn't need to. Instead, the story began to circulate behind closed doors, passed like wildfire between boardrooms, investor circles, and leadership retreats. She walked into their bank and they disrespected her. They had a $2 billion deal on the table, and they let it fall apart at the front desk. If that's how they treat someone like her, who's next? The whispers weren't angry. They were disappointed. And disappointment in business is more dangerous than scandal. It lingers. It makes people reconsider. It makes partners pull out. Before long, the impact became visible. Other banks began pausing communication. New clients reassessed their priorities. 2 financial publications even noted a strange dip in the bank's projected partnership revenue, but no one could trace why. Then came the investors. A group of key stakeholders began asking tough questions on quarterly calls. Stockholder confidence wavered. PR teams scrambled to contain the growing silence. The teller responsible? Quietly fired. The branch manager? Transferred. But it didn't matter anymore, because the damage had already been done. And not just to the bank's image, but to its soul. Trust, once broken in a quiet, humiliating moment, could not be mended with press statements or polished apologies. Danielle Monroe's exit hadn't made headlines. It had made history in the rooms where deals are built and broken. It wasn't just a lost client. It was a lost future. The bank didn't just lose $2 billion in growth. They lost access to the kind of innovation, leadership, and impact that could have redefined their place in the financial world. And it all happened because one employee, in one moment, forgot that every person who walks through those doors could be someone who changes everything. Danielle Monroe never made a public statement. There were no tweets, no Instagram stories, no press conferences, no exclusive interviews on morning talk shows. There was only silence. And that silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, measured, powerful. In a world where people rush to expose every injustice online, Danielle chose a different path. Not because she was weak or indifferent, but because she understood something far more commanding. Sometimes silence speaks louder than outrage. Her decision not to speak wasn't a retreat. It was a strategy. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to prove that what happened to her was wrong. Because the truth had already spoken. The footage had already rolled. The opportunity had already been lost. And the bank, they were already learning the lesson. Her quiet exit sent a message, clear, undeniable, and unforgettable. If you can't respect a black woman standing in front of you, you don't deserve to stand beside her in business. It wasn't just about her being ignored, or her ID being thrown. It was about the casual way in which a moment of disrespect was delivered. The ease with which someone believed she didn't belong, simply based on how she looked. The bank had evaluated Danielle Monroe based on appearances. What they failed to realize was they were staring at the very future of their industry, and dismissing it. As days passed, the story of what happened inside that bank began to circulate, not through scandal or headlines, but through whispers in high places. She was there to sign a $2 billion deal. She didn't even say a word when she walked out. The bank still doesn't know what it lost. CEOs at Fortune 500 companies heard about it. Boardrooms discussed it quietly. Investors began rethinking where they placed their trust. And soon, a powerful truth began to rise to the surface, not just about Danielle Monroe, but about something every industry needed to hear. Respect isn't something you reserve for people who look successful. Respect is something you give, because every person has worth. The person walking into your lobby could be a billionaire, or they could be someone just starting out. But they both deserve to be treated like they belong. Danielle's silence wasn't just for her. It was for every woman who's been doubted. For every black professional who's been overlooked. For every person who's been made to feel small in a space they worked hard to enter. And by walking away without raising her voice, she did something many people never get the chance to do. She made the world listen, without ever having to speak. Her silence cost the bank more than bad press ever could. It cost them trust, reputation, a legacy partnership. And most of all, it forced them, and others, to reflect on what they allow to happen when they think no one's watching. In the end, Danielle didn't need to reclaim her power, because she never lost it. She walked in with it. She left with it. And her silence? That was her final move. A reminder that real power doesn't beg to be seen. It simply shows up, does the work, and walks away when it's no longer valued. And that is exactly what she did. As the world slowly learned what happened that day, the story became more than just the tale of one CEO and one bank. It became a mirror. A moment of reflection for industries, companies, and individuals everywhere. Because respect is not about who someone looks like. It's about who someone is. Danielle Monroe was proof that brilliance wears many faces. That dignity doesn't shout, it walks. And that sometimes, the most powerful message isn't posted. It's felt. In silence. In boardrooms. In consequences. And in the story people will never forget. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Backhand index pointing right, hit that like button to stand against everyday injustice. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories that reveal the truth behind power, prejudice, and quiet strength. And don't forget to comment below, what would you have done in Danielle's place?